So welcome to the Lyceum and to our first IForum of 2025, highlighting deeply affordable housing as an economic strategy. My name is Chelsea Ross, if we haven't met. I serve as the Executive Director of the partnership, and I'm really pleased to have you all in person with us today, and that the snow squalls cooperated despite it being January. If you haven't been with us at the Lyceum before, there are gendered restrooms up that staircase to the side of the stage. There's also a gender-neutral bathroom towards the back, your right corner. And feel free to refill your coffee, tea, and we have a lot of cheese in the other room. If you haven't seen, there's like a lot of cheese. There's cookies, there's brownies. I think there's vegetables too, but you know, in the afternoon, those are less popular. I will also say that today marks the start of the Lunar New Year, which is a time of renewal and reflection and hope for many communities around the world, including here in Connecticut. And this year, we welcome the Year of the Dragon, which symbolizes strength, wisdom, and courage. So I wish each of you prosperity, joy, and good health in your new year. You'll have several opportunities to join the conversation in the room today, but we also invite you to join us at #IForum25 on all the platforms. If you're new to Blue Sky, so are we, so you can find us there. And a note that Don is doing a great job of recording today's event, and we will make a recording available on our website post-event. So if you just had so much fun and you want to revisit the conversation, or you'd like to share it with a colleague, we would greatly appreciate that. We will be joined in just a moment by Deputy Commissioner Matthew Puglisi from the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development, as well as Department of Housing Commissioner Seila Mosquera-Bruno, to talk about the link between housing stability and economic stability and growth here in Connecticut. Next, we are delighted to be welcoming Kristen Klurfield from the Bipartisan Policy Center to discuss her report exploring the affordable housing shortage's impact on American workers, jobs, and the economy. Following Kristen's presentation, we have a distinguished panel of community leaders who will share their insights on how deeply affordable housing has impacted them, their work, and their communities. We'll close out our afternoon together with a brief overview of some key housing policies that support affordable housing creation, choice, stability, and affordability, and work towards reshaping the state's housing landscape to support resilient and vibrant communities. A brief introduction to the partnership and the work that we do. We shape solutions to housing issues in Connecticut through advocacy, research, and convening. We work to provide valuable, timely materials to inform policies, empower communities, and foster a deep understanding of our affordable housing challenges and solutions. We engage in smart policy design and strategic civic and political advocacy to expand housing opportunity. And we serve as a hub of knowledge and collaboration, and we create spaces like this for shared insights and collective action. We envision a future where everyone has a safe, stable home that's affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. We are here for housing justice, access, and equity, and our guiding principle is that housing is a human right. We work to impact change for individuals across the housing stability continuum. As a result of our work, fewer people in Connecticut should experience being unhoused or unstably housed or living in temporary, unaffordable, or unsafe housing conditions. That means that people should be able to afford their homes while still meeting their other basic needs. We know that we simply need more homes for people in our state, and that they need to come in all shapes and sizes and in every community across our state. And that people should have real choices about where they live, and they deserve to be protected from the harms of housing instability, eviction, and homelessness. A little bit off the planned script, we all went to bed or woke up to the announcement yesterday that we would see a temporary freeze on federal financial assistance programs, potentially pulling trillions of dollars from police departments and domestic violence and homeless shelters and nutrition services and disaster relief programs, and of course, housing programs. that rely on these federal funds, a decision that has now been blocked by a judge through Monday. Like many, the partnership is deeply concerned about the impact that this will have on Connecticut's families and communities if it moves forward. We rely on these federal resources funded by the taxes that we pay to prevent homelessness, preserve and expand affordable housing, and ensure access to safe, stable homes for all of our families, our seniors, our people with disabilities, and everyone in our communities. The housing programs potentially affected our lifelines for thousands of Connecticut residents and support the stability and well-being of over 150,000 households, low-income households here in the state, many who are already navigating the challenges of housing insecurity and the high cost of living in our state. So we are united with many of you in this room and many partners across the state, working hand in hand with our federal delegation to act swiftly and protect the housing resources that Connecticut families rely on for security and stability. So I'm going to level set a little bit on income and housing costs as we get started. Inequality has skyrocketed in the state of Connecticut and across the country over the past few decades. Since 1979, the top 1% have seen their incomes grow by over 300%, while middle and low-income households have seen far more modest gains. This widening gap isn't just unfair, it also slows our economic growth, it increases financial instability, and it makes it harder for families to afford basic necessities, including housing. Economic inequality doesn't just impact individuals and individual households, it actively slows down economic growth for all of us. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that rising inequality has reduced US GDP growth by 2 to 4% each year. Here in Connecticut, that could mean losing 40 to 85% of the economic gains we saw from last year's 4.7% growth rate. To put that into perspective for you, the drag on our economy from inequality is comparable to the impact of a major federal stimulus, like the $5.1 billion investment in Connecticut that has been over the 3 years during the Great Recession. Connecticut is one of the wealthiest states in the country, yet we also have some of the highest levels of income inequality. We're tied with Wyoming. The United Way's Alice report shows that despite our high average income, nearly 40% of our households struggle to afford the basics. Over 560,000 households are living paycheck to paycheck or are often unable to cover essentials like food, health care, and their housing. So as you are all aware, housing costs are one of the biggest drivers of income inequality. In fact, a full 25% of the rise in income inequality over the past 50 years is directly tied to the increasing cost of housing. Since 2021, rents in Connecticut have surged by 29%, which makes it even harder for families to stay afloat. Over 120,000 renter households, primarily Black and Latino, are paying more than half of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. And with the wage needed to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment at $34.54 per hour, which is far above the $22.30 hour average renter wage, housing costs are pushing families deeper into financial hardship. State investments in housing, while vast and important, unfortunately haven't kept up with the realities facing extremely low-income households. Rental and voucher costs have risen nearly 30%, but the State Housing Voucher Program, also known as RAP, has not seen an increase in funding. Nearly half of all state bonding for housing has been directed to programs that primarily serve middle-income households, which is important. They have deep impact, but they're not creating the deeply affordable housing that we desperately lack. For example, the Time to Own down payment assistance program has reached tons of households, but only 3% of those recipients were below 30% area median income. And Build for CT subsidizes construction for 60 to 120% AMI households. We make these investments and everyone needs a house, but we consistently have folks at the lowest area median income left out. So that's why we're here today. So as I get started and hand things off, I first want to acknowledge the team here at the partnership that put today's forum together. First and foremost, Alicia Gardner, a senior policy analyst who led the development and execution of today's forum. Thank you, Alicia. And right to Alicia's left is Danielle Hubley, who took care of all of the logistics for today, including the cheese that you will all eat. Thank you to the entire team of the partnership that worked to make the forum possible. I'd also like to take a moment. I see a couple of staffers and elected officials who have joined us today. It is a busy time, so I really appreciate you taking a couple hours out of your day to join us, and thank you to each of you for taking time out of your day to join us. And for those of you who made a donation with your registration, we work hard to keep these events free, and your donation offsets the cost of the event, so thank you very much. Lastly, speaking about donations, a huge thank you to Bank of America for their sponsorship of the IForum series. Their support each year enables us to deliver this series on the connections between housing and other policy issues and foster collaborations to better enhance Connecticut's economic health. And we're so pleased that Joe Gianni, President of Bank of America of Greater Hartford, has joined us today, and I'd like to invite him to say a few words.
Well, thank you. Happy Lunar New Year. On behalf of our 2,500 teammates that we have here in Connecticut, we're pleased to support the Partnership for Strong Communities. And we've been with the partnership since day one. You see, we were the trustee bank for Melville Trust. So in its inception, we were there, and been friends with Diane Randall and board members like Howard Rifkin and Mike Hanley, who worked here, and Kylie Goslin, and now Chelsea. We're so happy to be part of this. And back in 2021, the partnership was a winner of a Neighborhood Builders Award. And for those of you who don't know what that award is, this is the 20th year that we've been doing it. We award in the Greater Hartford area two worthy organizations, $200,000 in unrestricted funds. And in 2021, the partnership was one of those award winners. And maybe you'll apply again sometime. It'd be great. But why do we do that? We do that in order to help foster strong communities. And part of that is having affordable housing. And I, too, am going to go a bit off script. I was in New York Monday and Tuesday. And so the issue of affordable housing is not just in Connecticut. It's Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. But they did a poll, Siena College did a poll, what's the number one issue that the legislature should deal with? And it's affordability. When you dig down, what do they mean by affordability? It's not just the cost of eggs, but 70% of the respondents said it's housing. So housing is the issue, and hopefully today we'll hear about some of the ways that we can address that issue. And I know we're going to talk about affordability, but from my perspective, as someone who cares about creating jobs and sustaining jobs in Connecticut, I'll just give you an anecdote, and you'll hear data, real data from the experts, but just anecdotally. We have two people here in our Hartford office who were looking for housing. One's in her 30s, the other one's in her 40s. Both married, working, both spouses working. One has a child, the other one doesn't. For the 30-year-old, it took them 2 years to find a house. And that's that's someone who's pre-qualified. And wasn't being picky, overly picky. It's just the market, and had put in 3 or 4 offers and just couldn't, close on that deal. The second, in her 40s, it's been 3 years, she still hasn't found housing. So why does that concern me? Because if you look at financial services, there are about 100,000 jobs in financial services in Connecticut. If you figure there's a 15% turnover every year, that means there's about 15,000 people who are leaving. And if they're going to be replaced, right, even if 50% of those people need to find a house, that's 7,500 people, right? if we're interviewing somebody of caliber who wants to work for the bank, and I sit them down with one of these two people and they say, so what was it like, finding a place to live in Connecticut? And they tell them, well, it took me 2 years or 3 years before I found a house. That's going to be tough. So just trying to make the connection between a healthy economy, workforce development, and just the housing supply. So hopefully we'll hear more about that today. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for letting us be a part of that.
Okay, thank you so much, Joe. So just about a year ago, Matthew Puglisi was named Deputy Commissioner and Chief Investment Officer of the Department of Economic and Community Development. Matt oversees real estate, capital projects, brownfield, community development initiatives at DCD. That's a lot. Since joining in 2022, he's played a key role in launching the $875 million Community Investment Fund 2030, driving economic and community growth in historically underserved areas. Previously, Matt led DCD's community development programs, managed state grant initiatives, and held leadership roles at the Connecticut Small Business Development Center, UConn, and various nonprofits. Matt is a dedicated public servant serving on Old Saybrook's Board of Selectmen and is past chair of its Economic Development Commission. He's extra awesome in that he holds a master's in public administration from UConn, which I also do. So that's extra points for him. So thank you so much for joining us, Matt, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I forgot to tell Chelsea not to read that, which I usually ask. But thank you. It's great to be here. I just want to start my little timer so I give Selah enough time to follow me. The one thing that I do want to add just for this audience is when I first got into government, and it was running for elected office as state representative in Old Saybrook before I became a member of Old Saybrook's Board of Selectmen. Housing was one of those issues in my local community that drove me to get involved in our Economic Development Commission, to run for state legislature unsuccessfully, and now to serve on our Board of Selectmen. And I'm really proud that our town formed an affordable housing task force last year and also got money into our budget to give some legs to that task force as we can look at some potential projects and continue down that path. So I just think it's important to mention because it shows that as I talk about what we're doing at the state level, you can see that the people that are doing this in their day job do care about these issues when they go home from work. I see one of my constituents there in the back nodding her head. So at DCD, we believe that housing is a critical piece of economic development. We work very closely with our partners at the Department of Housing to support projects simultaneously, collaboratively. And we do this in a lot of different ways. In some ways, we run grant programs. We provide funding. We have an Office of Permit Ombudsman that is supposed to help private business developers navigate the complexity of the state permitting and approval processes and try to short circuit that whenever possible. We very much, especially under our current commissioner, believe in creating a consistent and predictable environment for developers as they go from community to community and across the state so that we know the dollars that are going into projects turn into more dollars the longer something sits. So how are we doing this? So in some ways, we are at the table as an agency, DECD, participating on a lot of boards. So the Capital Regional Development Authority, we have a seat on that board. They're very involved in housing development across the 9-town region. The Municipal Redevelopment Agency that was recently launched, DECD, has a role in that. We serve on the CHAFA board as well, trying to make sure that we bring diversity of perspective. We've also been happy to serve on different initiatives at the state level to help keep housing and equity in housing as a center part of that conversation. So there was I don't know how much I can publicly say, there was a recent high-level RFP for a development opportunity of state property in New Haven, and DCD was on that RFP review panel to make sure that we were thinking beyond just what's the best bang for the buck, but we're thinking about the impact on the neighborhoods. We're thinking about the housing and how we're thinking about it in a diverse way, not just hitting minimums. So we run a couple of different programs, and I just want to give you a snapshot. I don't want to do the laundry list of everything. We've been running a brownfield remediation and development program for many, many years. It's really a successful program. Over the life of the program, for every dollar of state funds that are invested, we are seeing about $12 of private funds flow into projects. And when you look back, I did a quick little grab. Since 2021, through the Brownfields program, we have helped support the creation of 6,700 new units of housing in 4 years. But you say, we know right now, everybody is talking about how housing is a critical issue that we're facing. What have we been doing in the Lamont administration about this more recently as we become more aware about this? So we look back to 2023. So just in the last 2 years, the last 4 rounds that we've done of Brownfields funding, of those 6,700 units, 4,300 units were funded during this last 2-year period. So we've really accelerated as much as we can within the vehicles that we have as an agency, our strategic focus on making sure that we are supporting housing through that program. But we have to look across all of our programs and see how we can participate with DOH, with CHAFA, with HUD as a partner. And I think that we've done that really well. And a big key piece of that, I think, was when I came into the agency and we started the Community Investment Fund. Community Investment Fund really represented a seismic shift and was part of a seismic shift in the Lamont administration. We all remember the debt diet when the governor first came in as we tried to get everything back on track. At that time, DCD was seeing somewhere around 25 Urban Act grants that would be awarded a year in 2018, 2019. Now we are seeing 30 or 35 Urban Act grants every time the bond commission meets. The $875 million that we are investing through Community Investment Fund, we're 50% of the way through the lifespan of that program. We've funded 135 different projects through that. What does that mean? It's a lot of numbers. It means that under Governor Lamont's leadership, DCD is focusing on investing in our communities. It's live, work, and play. So while you might not always say DCD is investing in housing, we're investing in the things that go around the housing. We're connecting the housing. I was standing recently at the ribbon cutting for the new Spinnaker development on the old Coliseum site in New Haven. And I realized in the last 6 months how many times I had stood at groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings within a couple hundred yards of where I was standing. State Street, we made awards through the Community Challenge program to fund traffic calming and bike lanes up and down State Street. It's supporting multiple new housing developments that are happening. We put money from Community Investment Fund into the downtown evening soup kitchen, and they have a partnership with Cornell Scott Hill Health Center to provide increased services right around the corner. We have brownfield money into the Coliseum site. The Coliseum site is the current subject of the City of New Haven's application that just got moved forward to a finalist for the Innovation Cluster Program. The Innovation Cluster Program is the way that DCD is supporting an investment in our business community and creating an infrastructure that's not just going to help businesses today, but are going to create an ecosystem that are going to help businesses grow over the next decade plus. And housing is a critical piece to that. We've said in that program that we want to make sure that these successful funded projects and innovation clusters are taking advantage of housing, are taking advantage of transit-oriented development infrastructure. And so we're being very thoughtful in the way that we look at things and the way that we link projects. And so in that little example on New Haven, it's just one way of showing the pipeline of projects that the Community Investment Fund has given to DCD and to the state of Connecticut. We've had we're up to 6 rounds, so I'm going to try to do math in my head on the fly, but we have had nearly 1,000 applications that have come in over 2.5 years for projects across 50 municipalities in the state. It gives us a pipeline of housing projects, of infrastructure projects, of community support projects. And that allows us, Selah and I talk all the time about the order of operations, where projects are in the pipeline, how different funding sources can flow so that we can work to coordinate together as agencies. And so I think that that's one of the big benefits that has come out of, besides the $875 million, that's come out of the Community Investment Fund, is it's helped us as a process to really think about how DCD and our sister agencies can layer investments and really work as a team instead of in silos as we support projects. So just a couple of other numbers, just to show where we're putting our money where our mouth is. The Communities Challenge program that we ran was a $100 million investment program. 1,500 units of housing came out of that program. Community Investment Fund so far in 2.5 years, 1,600 units of housing we've participated in funding. A lot of those were funding side by side with DOH and CHAFA. But we've also looked and said, okay, we need to be smarter in terms of how we are coming together as agencies. So we've very collaboratively shifted the administration of those housing grants over to Department of Housing. But to the developers that are sitting in the audience, we're doing that so you have one point of contact, that you don't have to deal with 3 different project managers across agencies. You don't have 3 different state lawyers racking up legal fees. We're trying to streamline and create efficiency in the way that things are administered and moving forward. And the other thing that I don't count in any of these numbers is through Community Investment Fund, through brownfields, we're creating a lot of infrastructure and opportunity for future development. So just as an example, in Griswold, Connecticut, we're funding water and sewer line extensions. And that's all we talk about in terms of where our dollars are going. But it's going to unlock 200-acre piece of property that the town has a master plan to bring the YMCA in, to build over 450 units of senior and affordable housing in the first phase. So we don't even capture those types of investments in our numbers, but I hope that we can capture them 2.5 years from now when we're standing here. And I think, the last piece that I want to, really mention, because I think it's very important, is Community Investment Fund. It's in the statute. These infrastructure projects are supposed to have a direct impact on a target underserved population that is defined as all persons of color, LGBTQ plus populations, members of religious minorities, people that live in rural communities, and all others that have experienced persistent poverty and inequality. And that's the main focus of this program. It is about infrastructure focused on equity. And DCD takes that very much into mind as the North Star when we're making decisions, or we don't make the decisions. When we are reviewing projects, when we are guiding applicants in their submissions to say, you've not had any community input in this project, or who are the people that are going to benefit? Because saying that you're going to increase your town's taxes is not the primary way that you're going to have a direct impact on your target population. And, especially in the changing environment that we're in, we think that it's even more important to make sure that it's clear that equity is the guiding lens that we use at DCD when we are making the Community Investment Fund investments. So thank you very much for having me and DCD here today. I'll turn it back over to Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Matt. Next, I'd like to invite the Commissioner of the Department of Housing, Selah Mascara-Bruno, to say a couple of short remarks before we get to our keynote presentation. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Commissioner.
Oops. Good afternoon, everyone. As you saw in your agenda, I'm not in your agenda, but I decided to crash a party, which, if it's housing, right, I should be there. This is an important topic, and it goes to my heart. I used to work for an affordable housing developer organization in 3 counties, New Haven, Fairfield, and New London counties. So for the past 25 years, as a developer in my previous life, I always wanted to convince the administrators and the people of power that housing was economic development. And we couldn't do that. Nobody wanted to talk about housing. Housing was just something that could happen. So we are playing catch up because this is not an issue that we have that is today. It has been an issue for many, many years. And we cannot build fast enough. So what are we doing at the Department of Housing? But I have to make a joke with Matt. He just was smiling. He couldn't hold it that he said that SIF applications, he is partnering with us and we're doing the work because we're doing his work. But the important thing is that the collaboration, right? The collaboration that we have with the state agencies, with the ECD, with DEEP, is so important. And CHFA, I'm on the board of CHFA. He mentioned these other organizations that are working on housing, like CRDA, MRDA, all these acronyms. I'm on those boards too, because the governor has a vision and we are working towards that vision. And that is that all we align our resources together to do the work that we need to do. Since I wasn't invited, so I'm gonna just give you a few facts and a few programs that we have. So since the Governor Lamont administration, we have completed a little over 13,000 units. And although there was a dead diet, as Matt mentioned before, he was funding projects, about $400 million in state financing that leverage. He mentioned on DCD 1 to 12, we do 1 to 5. We bring other public investment, and we have utilized one of the resources that have not been utilized in many years because we didn't have money on the state, is the low-income housing tax credit, 4%. So we got it 9% and only funds about 6 to 7 projects. The 4%, I was looking at my chart, we do like 9, 10 projects with the 4% because we bring equity and we bring the subsidy that needs those projects to be able to function. Another clarification I want to make is that all the units, our asset policy, the Department of Housing funds projects that have 80% affordable, meaning from 30% up to 80%, with a 20% unrestricted because we don't want to create centralized poverty in one building, right? So Chelsea was talking about that we have put more money into the middle income, which is not, that's what I'm doing the clarification. I don't want to say it's not true because she's not lying, but she probably doesn't have enough information. In the 2 years, 23 and 24, with the budget where the governor gave us $800 million, the governor, the legislators, put into the Department of Housing $800 million for housing. We have done $400 million to our main focus, which is to develop those units between 30% and 50%. We put more money into those 50% and below because we know that that's where the need is. We're talking about minimum wages, that people can now afford their homes. They're making $22. My daughter, as a paraprofessional, makes $22 an hour. She couldn't afford a home if I kept power from my house because she can afford an apartment. So that's our main focus. But yes, we also have to do middle income. Middle income, we have spent about $265 million. That's between the middle income program that we created and the promotion of homeownership, which we have invested almost $200 million in the creation of 5,400 homeowners in the last 2 years, up to 100%. So majority of those residents are between 60% of AMI, 70%, 80%, up to 100. That's the max. So you really don't, you are into that working class that really don't have the ability to save money for a down payment. This is a forgivable loan up to $25,000 that if the person stays in their home for 10 years is forgiven, making them or giving them the opportunity to be able to get equity into their homes and also to stay where they are. So our goal, basically overall, is to help our emergency housing, which are our shelters, and try to reimagine in shelters where we are actually doing hotel style in shelters where they have wraparound services, then into our 30% to our 80% AMI, and then we also our middle income, which we are bringing the for-profit developers to give us affordability, at least 20% on those projects that they're working right now. Right now, we have under construction about 7,000 units that are under construction. And every month, we have 3 or 4 projects that we're closing on. Now, we don't do it alone. We have Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. We align our resources, and that's why we are doing what we're doing. And we cannot stop. We have to keep going, right? So, but there are challenges. Construction workers, contractors, we don't have enough supplies, and the cost keeps going up every day. So we have many of those challenges, and we're trying with the departments, the way that a developer comes to us, we have something called development engagement process, so we don't say no to anyone unless it's a really like, nah, this is just ridiculous. We try to work, and we provide technical assistance, and during that time, a person or a developer can come in, talk about the project, we'll encourage them what type of resources we can get, and then if they're ready to proceed, then we'll invite them to apply. So basically, it's not a round where you deny it and you have to go again. So we're trying to make it very easy and simplify processes, which we have done too, especially with SIFs, DOH, and CHFA. We're trying to eliminate all these barriers and legal fees and all these other professional fees. And I think that's about it, what I want to tell you. So we will continue working together. Collaboration for us is the word that we must to be able to do that. And the technical assistance to municipalities. I knew I was forgetting something. We also provide technical assistance to municipalities. I have a planner in my staff that is meeting with municipalities and helping them to, whether it is revising their zoning, whether it is to provide some feasibility studies on sites that the town owns to be able to do more housing. So thank you very much. And next time she will invite me and I won't crash.
Thank you so much for Commissioner. We actually always love it when you crash, and really appreciate your remarks and all of the work that you're doing to contribute to stable and affordable homes for all in Connecticut. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. As a brief introduction, my name is Alicia Gardner. I'm a senior policy analyst here at the partnership, and it is my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, our keynote presenter, who will be joining us from Washington, D.C. virtually. So Kristen Klurfield is a senior policy analyst with the Terwilliger Center, I may have butchered that, for housing policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center in D.C. Prior to joining the Bipartisan Policy Center, she was a housing policy analyst at the Santa Clara County Housing Authority in San Jose, California, and has worked in previous roles with the preservation of affordable housing and the capacity building of nonprofit housing developers. She will be presenting her research exploring the affordable housing shortage's impact on American workers, jobs, and the economy. So we're really thrilled to look at both the national and the data and the academic level side of how affordable housing and the workforce and the economy all intersect, and we'll be followed by a panel. But thank you so much, Kristen. We'll get you started up here on the screen, and we're so excited for you to join us.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be with you virtually today. As Alicia said, my name is Kristen Klurfield, and I'm a senior policy analyst at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I want to really thank Partnership for Strong Communities for the opportunity to discuss a report that our team published on the connection between affordable housing and economic growth, with special attention towards lower wage working households. Again, I'm happy to be here today to discuss the report, and I hope some of this information is helpful to you in your work to improve housing options for households in Connecticut. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I have some slides. Okay, so before I get into the report, I just wanted to spend a minute or two talking about who the housing team is and who we are at BPC. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we work to bring together Democrats and Republicans, folks of different ideologies and philosophies, to advance legislation that ultimately improves the lives of families in the U.S. And we have several policy teams, one of which is housing, but we also have economic policy, healthcare, immigration. And the housing team sits within the Ronald Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy, which was established in 2021. And so our whole goal really is to work to expand the supply of affordable housing through federal legislation, but also to preserve our existing affordable housing and to help families afford their housing costs in the private market. Like other teams at BPC, we put out research and analysis. We tried to share it with members of Congress and their staff, but also other advocates, students, anyone else that might be interested in housing policy. And here's just a few publications that we put out recently that I thought might be of interest. The National Housing Trust Fund impact. I saw some information on the trust fund on Partnership for Strong Communities website. And then we've been doing a series of case studies on the impact of zoning reforms and improving the ability to construct new housing and different types of housing. So we're always looking for ways to highlight what's working locally. And finally, we put out a report on reforming the inspections process in the Housing Choice Voucher Program as a potential way to improve landlord participation. So those are just a few of the things we've been working on. And we host our own events. We try to bring folks together of different viewpoints. Like I said, next week, or maybe it's the week after, we're having a discussion with the governor of Oregon to talk about what they're doing at the state level to reduce homelessness in their state and also to fund affordable housing construction. And we also, if you find yourself in DC in June, put on a free one-day conference on housing supply solutions. And so it's June 18th this year. So if you are here or even if you're virtually, you can participate virtually too. So I can send that link around if anyone is interested. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit about our report here. And, a lot of this is not going to be surprising to you, but sometimes it's nice to have research to back up what you already know and what you're seeing on the ground. So the United States has underbuilt housing by millions of homes, depending on the source, ranging from 1.5, 2 million to upwards of 7 million homes over the past 15 years. And the shortage is experienced differently in different markets across the country. But it's really not a problem of, just the East and West Coast and in large cities anymore. It's in communities across the country, rural, urban, suburban, and it's impacting renters and homeowners. And in Connecticut, there's a gap of a little over 92,000 affordable homes for extremely low income households. So housing supply trends do vary by state. Some states have seen an increase in the number of permits for new housing construction. Texas is leading the way with the biggest increase in permits. North Carolina, Georgia, and South Carolina are also doing pretty well. The greatest decrease you can see in blue is California. Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois are also have pretty significant decreases in the average housing permits. And you can see on the right, Connecticut's housing permits by decade. It's been declining. And in 2023, Connecticut was 40th in the US for housing permits. And so we can see, we're not constructing the amount of housing that's needed. Here, the change in housing construction that we saw on the maps on the previous slide are influenced by a lot of things, local, state, and federal. These are a few categories of actions that we found are really influencing the housing supply. I'm sure there's more, but these are the ones that I'm going to talk a little bit about. Restrictive zoning and land use policies. This is certainly a topic that we could, spend all day on, in particular because it's different everywhere, even within a state. But overall, local governments have been implementing stricter land use requirements, starting in the 1960s and 70s with the environmental movement to protect open space, but also to limit density and protect the housing values of people who already owned homes. And so in places with stricter zoning regulation, more demand for housing just means that there's higher housing costs because there's no construction in response to that demand. I think the housing commissioner mentioned the lack of construction labor. That's a really key limiting factor to expanding housing construction. We need to improve housing inventory to improve affordability. And the construction industry is aging, folks are retiring. And although I saw that the share of younger workers has been increasing in recent years, it has not made up for everybody that's retiring and aging out of that industry. With the Great Recession, we know that the construction employment dropped significantly. And since then, unemployment for construction workers has been very low, historically low, just reflecting the shortage of labor compared to the demand for it. And we still need millions of skilled home builders in the construction industry. And without that, we really can't make a dent in our housing supply shortage. In terms of the rising costs of construction and land, according to the National Association of Home Builders, the cost of building materials has increased significantly since the pandemic. And we continue to see a direct impact on the cost of construction projects as a result. And just this week, I saw that NAHB showed that lumber prices were almost 10% higher this year than they were 1 year ago. And so those inputs, result in more expensive projects. Again, a reduction in new housing starts, which we saw in the map on the last page. And then finally, the pandemic. We're still seeing the impacts of that. We all remember that the industry shrank at the beginning of the pandemic and then had to try to reopen to keep pace with the needs of households. But the housing industry's supply chain is complex because it relies on inputs from other businesses. So it's just sort of a snowball effect there. And the shortages of critical materials like lumber, roofing, and also things like appliances really delayed construction of housing. And again, the supply costs increased significantly because of that too. So all of those factors and more have really limited our housing supply and pushed up prices. And we have an affordability crisis. You can see on the left, that's the US overall. The monthly rents continue to increase. The rate of growth or the rate of increase has gone down a bit, but it's still increasing. And I think for, people that are making middle income and lower income wages, those wage increases are not as great as the increase in rents. And on the right, you can see from Connecticut, again, just the median gross rent continuing to increase. It's tracking pretty closely to the monthly rent overall in the US. And in December of last year, the Census Bureau showed that a record number of households are paying unaffordable housing costs. Almost 43 million households are spending more than a third of their income on housing. And so it's not surprising that would have ripple effects on the rest of the economy when so much of households' income is spent on one item. And so some of these impacts are, fewer people are moving to places where they could potentially make more money or find jobs that align with what they're looking for. And for decades, we've, economists and other folks had seen that people move from lower income areas to higher income areas. But this started reversing in the 1980s. And research has shown that the cost of housing is responsible for at least part of the change in the moving patterns of households. Also, the pandemic, we know, influenced where people live. Not everyone's tied to their office or to a specific housing market anymore. And the number of people with flexibility to work remotely tripled between before the pandemic and soon after. And so the charts in this slide show that people are moving away from large cities that often have higher housing costs. And they're moving to small metro areas, non-metro areas. They're also leaving the Northeast. They're going south, often to places with more space and cheaper housing. And so you can see in 2023, New England states experienced a net loss of population due to people moving out. Connecticut is in that category, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So that means potential workers, potential taxpayers, school students are all leaving the state, in some cases due to housing costs. We know that unaffordable housing hurts local economies because people can't afford to, to contribute to the local economy. It also can lead to a disconnect between where jobs are and where people are living that would be interested in those jobs. And so for the past several years, cities of all sizes and in all regions have, been shouting that housing costs are hurting their economic health. And so on the left, you can see from 2017, the National League of Cities surveyed 224 cities. And the most common barrier to economic health was housing affordability. And second to that was a mismatch between the workforce and their skills and what employers in those areas needed. And a few years later, in 2022, more than 100 mayors were interviewed. And same thing, the housing costs were by far the top economic challenge for cities. And if people can't afford to live near where they work, I'll talk a little bit about, what happens, but ultimately jobs go unfilled. And the Federal Reserve showed that there were 8.8 million job vacancies nationwide as of early this year. So that's a lot of jobs. And so this is just, showing what people are living every day. Lower wage workers face difficult choices when trying to find and secure employment. We know that location is important for hourly workers and lower wage workers because they often take transit to work and don't have the option to work remotely. That has become more common for other types of jobs. But in areas with high housing costs, it can be impossible to find housing that meets the needs of these workers and their families. And I found in Connecticut, a renter would have to earn over $34 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, which is significantly higher than the average wage of a renter, which is $22 an hour. And so to stay employed, people are commuting, they're taking multiple buses, they're taking trains or making long car rides. And this has been found ultimately to be a big cause of job attrition, of people quitting or being asked to leave, especially when it comes to hourly workers. or the family opts to pay housing costs that are unaffordable to them in order to live near the place where they work or where they want to work. This can lead to housing instability. They might miss rent and be subject to eviction or experience homelessness. And if they move or they're forced out of their house, they're going to be back searching for a position that's closer to where they're now located. And so that can be just a really difficult cycle to get out of for people who want to, remain stably employed and improve their economic security. I know Chelsea was talking about the economic inequality in the state and nationwide, and it's just the cost of housing can really be a player in that. A new study just came out this month that showed that, tying back into the last slide, that although wages are higher in cities, they're not high enough to account for the higher housing costs. So if somebody moves to a more expensive city, those higher housing costs are going to take up more than 100% of any higher earnings that they would make. And so it just, it's not surprising that people aren't moving somewhere that's going to be more expensive than the potential upside of a new job. But the good news is that we know what works to lower the cost of housing long term, and that is to increase the supply. And if there were adequate, affordable housing options in places where people actually want to live too, we would see a whole host of benefits, and not just related to housing costs or even housing stability, but the full community benefits. And I think the next panel might touch on this as well, but state and local governments are taking action to relax zoning restrictions. And also companies are starting to support the housing needs of their employees by building employer housing or offering stipends to attract new employees. But ultimately, we do need action that's much more widespread. Our team believes that the federal government does have a really big role to play in supporting the construction of the millions of housing units that we need. But if all of that did happen, then people could live in neighborhoods where they work, in areas that have good schools. People would spend less time commuting. None of this is surprising to you. Companies would have access to a more diverse workforce and a wider range of potential employees with skills that they're looking for. And economists have found that if even a few of the most expensive cities with really restrictive zoning change their policies to build enough housing to meet demand, the US GDP could benefit significantly. And so that's an argument we think policymakers, private companies, and even other countries should be interested in and pay attention to. And so while the team I'm on is a nonprofit and we don't lobby for specific legislation, we do have a partner organization that advocates for specific legislation in Congress. And these are some of the bills that we're supporting that we think could go a long way to boosting housing supply and housing affordability. The Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act would strengthen the low-income housing tax credit, which we know is the nation's biggest and really most important way to construct affordable housing. And the Choice in Affordable Housing Act we support, which would hopefully boost landlord participation in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The Neighborhood Homes Investment Act would create a tax credit to support the rehab and new construction of single-family homes, often where the cost of, rehabbing is higher than what the house might be worth when it's sold. And there's a few others on here that you've probably heard of, but I guess the last one, the Family Stability and Opportunity Voucher Act, doesn't specifically boost supply, but would authorize a new type of housing voucher that would help families with young children access areas with good schools and good jobs. And so those are a few federal options that we're looking at to improve housing supply. I know Connecticut is doing a lot in that space as well. And so I'm happy to hear from you. And I think Alicia might have a few questions as well. But just thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate being able to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was a fantastic report. And I saw a lot of people, especially on that last slide, taking some pictures of the policy priorities and ideas that you shared with us. So thank you so much for your work and for sharing. I just want to take a moment to explain to the audience how our Q&A is going to work today. So if you look at the agenda that you should have had on all of your chairs, or grab one from the chair next to you, at the bottom there is a QR code. So we're doing a virtual Q&A where you can scan that QR code and submit a question on your phone. If you don't have a way to read the QR code on your phone, you can also log into the website listed there and enter the code and submit the question as well. And I will have the questions popping up here on my desktop to read directly to Kristen. So please take advantage of that and participate in the conversation. We'll use the same QR code and process for our panel as well. But while you are thinking of your questions, I'd like to kick it off with a few of my own. And the first one is more of a personal preference question for you, Kristen. You know, you listed a lot of different ideas, a lot of different, bills that you're supporting, but for you, with your expertise and how you've worked before, if there were any policies that you think would be the best to prioritize to support housing creation stability, what one or two policies would you prioritize?
Well, I think there's a broad consensus, I think, in broad support for the low-income housing tax credit program. And because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is expiring, a lot of tax cuts are expiring this year, taxes are going to be on the table. And so I know there's a broad coalition that supports improvements to the low-income housing tax credit. And federally, I think, politically tax credits are potentially more supported by folks from both sides of the aisle. So I guess politically, I would say probably the low-income housing tax credit, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And I think the Yes in My Backyard Act actually was almost passed at the end of last year. I don't remember exactly what happened, why it didn't move forward. But that is, would help expand high density multifamily zoning. And I do think that zoning is also an area for that's pretty ripe for improvement. And could potentially make a big impact. It's going to take several years for both of those things for us to see an impact. But I think those are potentially two of the bigger changes that could be made. And I think in the meantime, supports for families that are paying for housing in the private market, like the voucher program, and like your state rental assistance program, I think are just going to be so important until we have the physical housing units that we need to build, put in place.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It really sounds like a both and approach, that we focus on the supply of the housing, not to put words in your mouth, but and do what we can in the meantime to make sure people stay stably housed as we get back
think
from
so.
this unit deficit. We've got some great questions that came in, so I'm just going to go straight to some of our audience questions. And following what you were talking about with the political feasibility, we have someone who asked, given the current climate in Congress, how likely is pro-housing legislation to pass this session?
Well, I wish I knew. And I'll say, I'm speaking for myself. But I do think that housing is an area that is less polarizing than some of the other issues, even than other teams in our organization cover. Housing cuts across every type of community, every region, every rural, urban, suburban neighborhood. People understand that housing is something that's needed to survive, and so we might not get everything that you might not get everything you want, depending on your political views, but I do think that again, with the expiration of the tax cuts, there is sort of a need for Congress to take action on taxes, which is good because they're pretty good at not doing things, and so if they're forced to take action, that's a window of opportunity for advocates. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to be an easy lift.
Thank you for your perspective on that. I know we all are watching very closely to see what's happening at the federal level and doing what we can at the state level. There's another.
I will say too, we have, and our lobbying partner has good relationships with people on the Hill, but ultimately members of Congress want to hear from people that live in their jurisdictions. So, your voice is more important than ours in a lot of aspects.
Thank you for that reminder. Next question. There seems to be a clear divide with more permitting in red states as compared to blue. As a bipartisan think tank, what do you think causes this, and what can Connecticut as a blue state do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'm not an expert on permitting. I don't know why. I will say in California, where I worked previously, environmental regulations and zoning to protect open space was a big, is important, but had consequences of restricting the building of residential development. And I think in the Pacific Northwest, it's similar. So, I think looking at the missing middle housing tends to be more palatable if zoning has not been something that's been on your state or local radar yet. Building housing, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes looks like the housing that's already there. It's not going to change the neighborhood character or contribute to parking issues. And so I think, potentially starting a little bit smaller, if you have a tough political climate, could be helpful. And also looking to states like, I think, Utah, we had the governor of Utah come last year to talk about housing and zoning reforms that they've done. And so while you are a blue state, if you were a red state, I would encourage you to look at other red states and what they're doing, have been able to do, and say, look, they can do it. But you could also use that as a blue state, say, see, even Utah can change their zoning to eliminate single family only zoning. That's something that we should be able to do too.
Thank you very much. I agree. It would be fantastic if we could make some progress on the zoning. And just to close out, one of the last questions I have for you as we wrap up this fantastic conversation. Many of the discussions and policy solutions at the intersection of housing and the economy do tend to focus on somewhat of the middle and upper middle income households, especially as it relates to attracting workforce talent from other states. What do you see as a benefit from not only a human standpoint, but also an economic standpoint from focusing on the creation of deeply affordable housing alongside these missing middle programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, from a human standpoint, I personally believe that everybody needs housing, and it is a right that everybody has. But from an economic standpoint, or from a more, I guess, corporate standpoint, if there is enough housing for folks of all income spectrums, then you're not going to be competing for the same housing. And so even if you do, if you're a middle income person and there's no middle income housing, you're going to be searching for housing that meets your needs, and you're going to be pricing out somebody who has even lower incomes than you. And, I think hourly and lower income or hourly workers make up almost half of the workforce. I think it's 40%. And so if 40% of the workforce doesn't have a place to live that's affordable to them, that has huge consequences for the employer and for social service agencies, and it just it impacts the entire economy. So I do think it makes sense from an employer perspective to want to retain your employees, and in order to do that, they have to be able to live close enough to be able to come to work every day and put their best foot forward, not be commuting 2 hours each way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments, for your presentation. We really appreciate everything you've shared. So one more round of applause for Kristen, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I really enjoyed this and appreciate the opportunity. And thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. We are going to move on to our panel of community leaders and Connecticut residents to share the individual perspective on how the housing situation has been impacting the people of Connecticut. I'd like to introduce our panelists as they're coming up to the stage. If you just sit in the chairs, and Danielle is going to help with, there we go. So we will be welcoming Alex Chavone, the Executive Director for the Friends Center for Children, a child care providing center in New Haven, alongside an educator at the Friends Center for Children, Eric Gill, who will be joining us. We'd also like to welcome Tiana Martin, who is a student at Charter Oak State College and a participant in the state's Unite CT program. And finally, we would like to welcome Tomas Olivo, the Initiative Director of Riba Espira Career Academy in Waterbury. So I will hop up on stage and we will kick off this panel. I want to grab, we'll share. Felt like the man behind the curtain if you guys have seen The Wizard of Oz sneaking up the side here. All right, so thank you for joining us. It'll be a little more informal. So we'd first like to start talking to Tomas, who is the Initiative Director of Riba Espira, an adult continuing education program in Waterbury. Tomas, could you please introduce yourself, the organization that you represent, and talk about how the housing situation has both affected you personally and the people that you work with?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. So my name is Tomas Olivo. I'm the Initiative Director for the Working Cities Challenge Initiative in Waterbury, created by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. I want to say about 7 years ago. So at this point, But our goal was to address some of the inequalities that when it comes to workforce in a particular neighborhood in Waterbury. When we assess Waterbury as a whole, which is struggling in many different areas, there was a particular neighborhood in Census Tract 3505, located specifically in the south end of Waterbury, that was struggling a lot with unemployment, underemployment, and a lot, just people living below poverty guidelines. And I'm talking about 26% unemployment rate, and 45% individuals living below poverty guidelines according to state guidelines. So we decided to focus on addressing some of those inequalities in the particular neighborhood. And the way we went about that was surveying the neighborhood to trying to figure out what the community thought that were the main barriers that they were facing towards obtaining employment that was sustainable, being able to enter job training opportunities, and so on. So the main three areas that they identified were GED, not having a GED. Number two was ESL, English as a second language. And number three was childcare, not having accessible childcare within walking distance that they could literally, just drop off their kids and go to work. So that was the main three. The main three, there were other transportation and housing for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And the other part of the question, so housing, me particularly, I am actually a product of Section 8, which is a housing voucher. I remember back in 2008, I arrived to the United States back in 2005 with my mother and my sister. And I remember in 2008, my mother actually received here in Hartford a Section 8 voucher. Unfortunately for us, I say unfortunately because of the situation, we could not find a landlord that was willing to accept the Section 8 voucher at the time. So that's how we ended up moving to Waterbury. And it was a very hectic time. I was actually just starting to go to college. My sister was still in high school. We were trying to figure out life. But yeah, we ended up moving to Waterbury, where we found an apartment. And back in the day, I'm talking about 2008, a 3-bedroom apartment was about $750 in Waterbury. Waterbury is one of those cities that were considered affordable in Connecticut, but now no longer that is the case. And what I've seen is an influx of out-of-state individuals moving into Waterbury. And what I think is happening in reality is as people, especially from New York, move up to Connecticut, as you know, the rent, for example, in Stamford is extremely unaffordable for Connecticut residents. So most people that live in Stamford they're working in New York. And then they moved up to Milford, New Milford, Bridgeport, and now we're up to Waterbury. And it just happens that Connecticut is a state that is in between two very big states, talking about New York and Massachusetts. So as rent becomes extremely unaffordable in those states, people are absolutely going to try to find other options. And transportation is a huge issue in Waterbury, and they're talking about creating a train that's going to go from Waterbury straight to, it's been in talks for many years, to New York. And I don't know if that's going to be a good thing or I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see. So personally, I have two kids, 2 and 3.5. I was in the market looking for a house. I wanted my children to be able to experience, the American dream. That's what a lot of us strive for, owning a house, having our children in our backyard, playing, and it's really not. I don't see that happening anytime soon, just because the way the market is. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Tomas. Thank you for sharing your story with me, with all of us. And I love the story of where you are. And when you told us the story of the Section 8 vouchers, this is the kind of thing where the voucher system helped your family at a time where there was a lot of chaos, and now you are running a program to help those who are unemployed or underemployed, and just watching the intergenerational connections from these types of programs and the difference that you're making today really is a testament to you and to the success that when we give people the tools that they need, they're able to just run with it. So thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Tiana Martin. She is a participant in Connecticut's Unite CT program, which some of you may not be familiar with, so I'm just going to do a brief intro of the program. Unite CT is a pandemic-era program using the remains of the Federal Emergency Rental Assistance funds that provides up to 12 months of rental assistance when a participant is actively engaged in a job training or job upskilling program. Like a commercial driver's license, a certified nursing assistance license, or another certification program. Unfortunately, as I've been in discussion with the manager of this program, there's both high demand for it at the opportunity hubs in the state, and the money is set to run out in September of this year. So it's a fantastic program with a fast approaching end date. So Tiana is a successful participant in the program and has graciously agreed to share her story and her experience.
Hi guys, good afternoon. My name is Tiana. What brought me here is I am a participant of the Unite CT program. I'm a single mom. I have a 4-year-old, so she's in preschool, and it was very hard for me to work because she goes to preschool at 12, so it's just an awkward time. I also was trying to go back to school, but I live in an apartment by myself, without having assistance. I was looking in August that I was scared that we were going to be homeless because I couldn't find any programs that would be able to help assist me. I was doing a cybersecurity certificate, and with that being said, Unite CT was able to help me. They helped me pay for my rent. I completed the program, and I also got an internship with Travelers in the summertime, which will start in June. So if it wasn't for Unite CT, honestly, me and my daughter would probably be on the street, homeless. Again, my mom, she also is a Section 8. She has a Section 8 voucher, but she lives in a 1-bedroom. So we did have the option to go back there, but it would have been very, very hard. And my daughter already started school. So I'm very thankful for Unite CT and the opportunity for them to allow me to go back to school. And now I feel like I said, I got a job at Travelers. I feel that I can be successful and provide my daughter the best life. If it wasn't for them, I don't know where I would be at today.
Thank you so much, Tiana. And again, I'm just so inspired by your story. And we look at a situation where a little bit of assistance, you were able to get the certificate, start this job this summer. And didn't you share you're going back to school in the fall?
Sorry, guys. I am also going back to school. The program was through Charter Oak State College. So I decided after the certificate to transfer there. So I am going back to school to get my bachelor's in cybersecurity. Thank you.
And thank you so much. And the motivating factor that you talk about for your daughter, it really the difference in having this stream of income, this stable housing that it'll make on the next generation is something that we just can't even begin to measure at this point. So next, you know what, Eric, if you're okay, I'm going to jump to Alex because there's a little bit of framing here. But Alex Chavone is the executive director at the Friends Center for Children that has been leading an innovative teacher housing initiative to tackle the housing crisis. So Alex, if you could introduce yourself and share a bit about the program, and in particular, what motivated you to start the program.
Sure, thank you. I just want to pause and acknowledge the fact that we've heard about childcare here now twice. So I'm a childcare director, and you heard in the presentation before that 50% of Connecticut residents, 50% of household income is spent on housing for a lot of Connecticut residents. Does anyone know what the percentage is that is spent on childcare? Close, 27%. So I'll give you a way to remember that. It's half my age. So 27% of our, so think if you're spending 50% on housing, 27% on childcare, what do you have left? Right? It's really a remarkable intersectionality of two crises, and that's really what brought our program about. So I'm the director of Friends Center for Children, as I said before. I'm also the co-chair of Child Care for Connecticut, and I'm a pedagogue. I'm supposed to be thinking about children and how children develop and providing places for working families to send their children in safe and joyful and academic spaces. And what became really clear is that if we are really going to have children be their best selves, their families need to be able to have their basic needs met. So I became someone who is managing families who are on the verge of homelessness. Right? So that became part of our work. And then as we started thinking about the amazing workforce that we partner with, so Eric is one of our amazing educators, it became clear that their basic needs were not being met and needed to be met. So about 4 years ago now, we started thinking about that, and we approached our educators and we said, you know, we want to pay you more, and we couldn't figure out how to do it. It took us about 8 months to come up with no solution. So options, because this is why we have Eric, he's amazing. So the options were either raise tuition for families or get federal or state or city funding. Federal, state, and city, no go. Raising parents' tuitions felt disingenuous. So we thought about tackling this from a different lens, which was if we can't give them more cash in their paycheck, can we remove a burden or an expense from them as a salaried benefit? So we surveyed our teachers. There were 29 at the time. They ranged in age from 22 to 65, just to give you an idea, all women at that time. We are 98% female, disproportionately women of color in our industry. And of those 29 women, only one owned their own home. And that is a symptom of the problem. If you are going to have people do work that is so critical, it's a public good, a social good, critical for human development, and pay them poverty level wages, they are not going to be able to invest in themselves. So we said this, they said, we surveyed them, housing was number one, followed by transportation, food, and utilities. Those were sort of their expenses. We offer insurance, so insurance was part of our plan package already. So we decided as an organization to offer housing. We had no idea what we're doing. I am not a housing expert, but it became clear that we needed to find a way. And we partnered with some amazing partners who are actually in the room, Susan and Greg, and we purchased 2 homes, 4 units, 2 homes, and we have built on that. We now have 9 units where we are serving 17 New Haven residents who live for free. It is 9 educators, 1 partner, and 7 dependents, so 7 children. And yeah, and I have to say, I sit here and think about, I don't know how you all feel, but I'm in a lot of rooms with advocacy groups, like people who care about people, and I have to say that I feel like I'm crazy half the time. Like, why is this so hard? We know what we need to do. We have a huge rainy day fund in our state. We know we need to invest more. If it's not raining, if this is not time for a rainy day, time to invest, I don't know what else is. So I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. And what we want to do, in Eric and I sharing our story and this story, is say, we have to think creatively, think differently. How can an investment in housing solve multiple crises? So for us, it provides housing. It allows people to be their best selves, which then in turn solves our workforce crisis, which then in turn solves the childcare crisis, which then in turn allows people to work, which then in turn increases our economic development. I mean, this is not hard to see the through line. So anyway, I know I'm preaching. I'm on a soapbox. If I could stand on it, I would, but.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I just love what you have been doing, and it's very tragic to hear about that this was the number one need among the teachers that you surveyed, but we always appreciate it from a housing perspective to hear and understand the intersectionality with other industries. And last but definitely not least, we'd like to introduce Eric Gill, who is an educator at the Friends Center for Children, and is also participating in the Teacher Housing Initiative. So if you'd be willing to share your story, that would be fantastic. Introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Eric Gill, and I am part of the Friends Center Teacher Housing Initiative. I'm also an assistant educator at Friends Center for Children, and I work with friends with children between 3 to 5 years old. So thank you so much for having me here because I'm taking a break. I love working with kids, but sometimes they can be a lot. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here and be part of this initiative, this program that is gonna help me a lot. I live in Waterbury, so I have to commute to New Haven. That's a distance of 50 minutes in a good day if there's no traffic. So that takes me a lot of time, energy, and money for gas. And right now, it's something that it's really hard for me. I also live in my uncle's house in Waterbury. So it's a family of 5 plus me and my brother. So it's a lot. So there's a lot of people living in one apartment. So it's a lot. And thank you for this program. I will be able to move with my brother to this new house where I will be able to work like 1 minute from work. And I will be able to bring my brother and be part of this amazing community that is forming there. The good thing about this program is that I'm gonna be close to some other fantastic educators who share similar stories to me of this situation that is housing right now. I remember I came to this country 6 years ago. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I was taking ESL, trying to learn English and dreaming about one day I'm gonna buy a house, live by myself, gonna have my children. But this dream, when the years came through, it was coming like very, very small. I was losing hope. But now with this initiative, I won't have to pay for rent, so I can save that money to one day be able to buy a house for me, and it's an opportunity for my brother to study and be able to grow as well in his personal life and his professional life.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Eric. And there's just a couple of things that I just thought was so interesting that you mentioned where you're living now with your uncle. There's a lot of people there, and you have a really long commute. And normally when we talk about housing, we are talking about units that aren't filled. We're talking about number of homeless or the rates that are increasing. We're talking about the rental cost that's increasing. But there are these real downstream impacts in the form of hours spent per week commuting, or what does it look like when maybe a family isn't unstably housed, but there's overcrowding in a unit. And these are very real, very negative impacts on both the people and the state that are not easily captured in the metrics and the statistics that we're sharing. I'm also just so excited for the opportunity that you have to have this fresh start. And I think that's really impactful that the very first thing you say that, now that my rent's covered, I can save for a down payment on a home. That there is a real importance in focusing on our renters in our state and the programs that can support the renters, because if we can support the renters by bringing down the cost of housing with more supply, by expanding the rental voucher system, then they're going to be empowered and enabled to do their best work and purchase their own homes and, move themselves up the housing stability ladder, as long as we can provide the supports at the key impacts of time. So I have one question. I had a few questions I sent the panelists to kind of talk about, but one that I really love is from all of your stories, there's a lot of positive progress being made on the housing front with government programs, with private programs. But we do see that it is a fragmented system, that for every person who gets a voucher, every person who's able to work at the Friends Center or participate in the Unite CT program, there are many individuals, maybe hundreds or thousands of individuals that would have benefited from that spot as well. So I'd like to open it up to anyone to answer that if there were a more robust safety net around affordable housing, if everyone could have access to these opportunities, and we invested at the level in the state to get to that point, what would you be able to do if housing wasn't this concern, if housing wasn't this issue, both for yourself or for the people that you work with?
For me, I can speak on my own experience. When I was trying to decide what I wanted to do for a living, I decided to be an educator. But for that decision, I was hesitating a lot because teachers are not recognized enough in means of the salary. So I was thinking, should I go with this path or go for another path that it's not what I like, but it's gonna give me a better salary, maybe a better house. But I decided to do what I like, and that is teaching. So from if everybody can have the opportunity to be in programs like this, to have voucher for housing, I think they will follow what they want to do, and we'll have better professionals that want to do the job they're doing, and better cities with people more happier and to be working. So, yeah.
Yeah, so if I can, so let me think about this for a second. I think that safety net is really when you have a stable housing, is critical for safety net, especially for children. Stability is important. Also, neighborhoods benefit a lot when you have stable people living in a neighborhood and not a transient. Also, people moving in and out. There's a lot more taking responsibility for my neighborhood. So stability is extreme. I think stability is everything. If you don't have stability, how can you have children focusing in the classroom? How can you have parents thinking about, I want to go to school or get a better job or advance my career, if you don't have that safety net? So I think everything kind of revolves around housing and having a stable home. So if you don't have that, how can you really think about anything else? Especially if you have a family that you need to take care of. In my role that I'm in right now, I see a lot of folks that come in and say, I need to work. I need a second job because I have to be able to afford my house or my apartment for my kids, for my family. So I think even though, our goal is really to make sure that they're advancing their career or doing better, I cannot blame someone for trying to be stable. That housing would solve a lot of other issues. It's almost like a domino effect type of thing, where if you're safe, if you feel safe and you have your house and your family safe, you have that safety net, everything else just falls in line. So that's just my perspective.
I agree as well. When I was working 2 jobs. So I would work from 7 to 3, and then I would go to my next job, which would start at 3:45, and I would be there to 1 because I was a server. So I barely got the time to see my daughter, and I always wanted to go back to school, but as you can see, I couldn't afford to go back to school because I had to work. So for me to afford my apartment, I had to work those 2 jobs. So I think if we had a more housing programs, like they said, more people would be able to do what they want. I've always been interested in IT, so I'm literally doing my dream job. I'm going to school doing what I've dreamed of doing, and I wish that more people could do this because last year I would never have thought that I would be able to afford to go back to school. So I think it's very important that we have more housing so that people we have more people going to do what they would love to do, and that also just makes more people working and having more jobs. Is creating more everyone and having the jobs that they would love.
Ditto, 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 ditto. And I think there's all these systemic impacts that we don't even know. So it's like, can we imagine a society where everyone has safe, affordable, stable housing? What would that look like? So from my perspective and the work that we do, we're always thinking about like the child as the identified person, and you were all children, right? We were all children, and the things that happened to us in that time of development and growth determine who we are in so many ways. Like you can all right now think of something that happened to you that has still sits with you. So if we can find a way to eliminate that from our youngest selves, imagine the obstacles that we would then be able to overcome as we move through life.
If I could add just one more thing, I think that the way that we need to start thinking about housing is really an investment that has a return. It's not really an investment that is waste money, but in reality, is you're investing in people, and when you invest in people and they do good things and they go to school and they get better jobs, that brings a return for the cities, for the state. So we do better as a society, as a state, So that's a way we have to start thinking about housing and other things, not just housing, but particularly housing, because you need that safety net. If you think about it in a perspective of, if I'm an investor and I buy a property, I want revenue, but I want the revenue. But maybe I won't get it now, but maybe later on, the revenue will be even more. So that's the way we have to start thinking about housing.
Yes, housing is investment. Thank you so much for your perspectives. And I just want to make a note that we have a few questions that have come in, but if you want to start submitting your questions now, fantastic. We've got quite a few coming in, but you can use the same QR code. There are a couple questions for Alex that I'm going to kind of pull into one with one of my own. People are very interested in this program. So a question, could you explain how it was possible for a child care center to acquire residential property? We have somebody else who asked the financial impact on your organization as a result of providing this important support. And I'm just going to tag in my last that we talked about when we first
I've already forgotten
discussed.
the first, so we should go in order.
How did you acquire the property?
Okay.
What is the
We'll do
financial
one at a
impact?
One at a time.
Okay.
How did we acquire the property? We partnered with a philanthropic donor who was really interested in the intersectionality of housing and childcare, Susan and Greg, who are here. And we found a property in New Haven. Just through a realtor who actually we went to and asked for some help. So a lot of people will lean in when you really are explaining your mission and vision. We have a pro bono attorney that helped us, and so we really maximized the donation that we received. And so we bought the property and it was donated to, they brought the property, it was donated to Friends Center. We then went to a pro bono attorney, and I'll just say the name out for everyone. It's the Pro Bono Partnership. Do you all use it? Because everybody who is a nonprofit should be using it. It's amazing and it's free. So they then helped us form a subsidiary LLC to hold the housing when we decided we were going to expand. Our goal is 24 units. And I can talk a little bit about the financial piece. So the way that it works, so we have multiple problems to solve in my industry. We need our educators to be well compensated. We don't have enough income from families because they are maxed out. We're not a free market system where we can charge what it actually costs to provide the care. So we had to think about how do we serve our teachers and pay them more while also not increasing our gap, because we already lose about $200,000 a year, right? So it's really a no-win scenario. So we had to look at this initiative and say, okay, it has to serve multiple purposes. It can't increase our costs, and but it has to increase their salary. So we immediately started doing calculations, and we worked with the Yale School of Management to look at the fiscal implications and what is the basically rate of return, for the initial investment, but then on an annual basis. And so we determined right now with our current units, which are 8 units, 4 houses, 8 units, we save about $180,000 a year in salary savings. So it's money that goes to the teachers that we wouldn't be spending. We couldn't spend it, but anyway, wouldn't be spending. We then did a projection. When we have 24 units, we will save about $550,000 in salary savings, and that is after taking out the cost to run the property, like your maintenance cost if you need a new roof in 10 years. So we build all that in. So, and most importantly about sort of the fiscal side of it is we are going to a donor or someone who believes in what we're doing, and it should be a federal or a state or, it should be public funds, and we're actually working on that with Michigan and in Boston right now, but in our state, not yet. I wish Matt was still here. But so that we're actually going to a donor and saying, hey, there's a couple options. One, could you give me $20,000 a year per educator for the next 100 years? Or could you give me a donation, a one-time donation that will allow me to buy this asset that actually is just sort of a transfer of money? You're not giving it away. You could actually just even transfer it and give us the house and we could use it. There's so many ways you can do this. And then our teachers will have an annualized return. So it's a one-time cost for an annualized return, which is exactly what I heard you talking about when we talk about the fiscal impact of housing. One-time investment for an annualized return that can go on for generations. So one of the key things that Eric mentioned that I forgot to is we believe that the transfer of wealth in our society, not even believe, we know that the transfer of wealth in our society is about property. And there are generations who have been cut out. And so our work is to really think about that transformation of wealth. And so each person who's in housing is paired with a fiscal literacy mentor, partner, coach, whatever language they want to use, and they work with them on their goals. So we have single moms who have 3 kids in housing. Paris, she's written an op-ed in USA Today, so you can read about it. She's amazing. And her first thing she did was the first time she could invest in her children. So one got into soccer practice, one went into dance, all these things. Other one had to get braces, like these things that she was unable to do. That was her goal for that first year. Her second year was buying a car, which she did. Now she's thinking about her savings account and how am I going to save for a down payment on a home? A different teacher who's moved in, whose children have graduated from school, closer to my age, has never owned their own home. She's going to live there for about 18 months just to save for the down payment because she can just go and buy a condo then after that. So everyone comes in and out based on their own life experience and where they are. I don't know if I'm off track on the questions. Did I get all 3?
The last one I didn't share, and
Okay.
this is from a conversation that we had earlier. I asked you if you would receive that same amount of money to build the housing for your teacher housing initiative, but housing was already set. You just had that lump sum. What would you be doing with it instead if housing was taken care of?
For the world?
For the state.
For the state, yeah. For the state. We'd raise teacher salaries, right? It would be invested into the quality and the wraparound services for the children and families that we serve.
Thank you. We are getting to the end here, so as a closing question, I just would like all of you to take a minute to say, and we have some staffers in the audience, what do you wish policymakers knew? If you could talk to them about the housing job situation in Connecticut, if you could share one thing with them. Please.
We're all trying to think about how to do it nicely. I think you can tell, I'll speak for myself, but I just want to say for me, it is really an honor to be here and have all these different lived experiences and ways where we're all saying the same thing. this is critical. Like, I think here's what I would say. We have this notion of what it looks like to be unhoused in our state, right? If we talk about this outside of maybe those of you who are here because you really believe in this, it's this idea of someone who's like on the sidewalk sleeping or panhandling or something. That's sort of the image. And I think what needs to shift is that it looks like this. Like, we look like this is what it really looks like. There are so many educators and families that I deal with and talk to and help or try to help that are doing everything they're supposed to be doing according to whoever that is, right? They're going to work, they're paying their bills, they're trying to do what's best for their family, and they're sleeping in their car, they're couch surfing, they're just, one windshield rock on your windshield away from being able to get to work, pay your bills. Like, that's what we need to be really this is a 4-alarm, 5-alarm, what's the highest alarm? Fire, right? And we need to lead with that.
Okay. All right. So I really wish that our policymakers, I'm gonna be polite, I promise, really knew how to invest our money, because it's really our money. And in reality, not just throw money at problems, because that doesn't really resolve the problem. It's working with people like Alice that are already doing something that's working, that have a system that is working in place, and replicating that, or maybe really going out of state and thinking about other ways that we can replicate other things that are happening in the United States that are actually working. Not just throw money at problems, because that's what I see a lot, unfortunately, and that doesn't resolve the problem. The problem needs to be resolved from the ground up, not just throwing money at it. So that's just my perspective.
I would just say, I would think just more policymakers to just be aware of what's going on. I feel like a lot of people are just not aware enough, not kind enough, and they're just not seeing real issues that are happening. Again, like I said, with these programs, like everyone has mentioned, you're investing in people, and that's just going to make society better. So I feel like if policymakers maybe looked at that more and seen that it's just an investment that's going to return to them, that it'll work out. But yeah, that would be it.
I would tell them that low-income people, we're here, we're working, we're trying to do our best every day. So please start thinking about us, because without us, the economy won't be the same.
You guys are giving me chills. I'm very lucky I didn't tear up listening to all of the passion and that you've shared with us today. So one more big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. And we're going to close with our Coalition Advocacy Director, who will kick off the legislative session and share the partnership's legislative priorities for 2025.
Thank you so much again to the panel. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Peltier. I'm the Coalition and Advocacy Director here at the partnership. I want to thank Alex, Eric, Tiona, and my friend Tomas for their remarks and taking their time to be here today. But sharing these important narratives have really offered a clear, illustrated, lived experience of how stable housing leads to not only an ability to be stable in employment, education, and career opportunities, but also enables one to plan for the longer term and take steps forward to securing a more financially stable future for yourself, for your family, and in the case of the Friend Center, what this type of stability in housing can do for an entire community. Of course, we also know the reverse to be true. There is a systemic instability and harmful domino effect, thank you for using that word, Tomas, that goes along with the tenuous, unaffordable, unreliable housing scenarios, the worst of all of which is not having one at all. This instability and unaffordability is what many of our neighbors in almost every community across our state are facing. What can we do and what can you do to help stop the cycle? As most of you know, Connecticut's legislative session just kicked off a couple of weeks ago. And as we conclude today, I wanted to take a brief opportunity to explain what the partnership's legislative priorities are for this session. We're seeing that housing is one of the biggest issues on the legislative agenda. And we're hoping for smart policy solutions to be enacted this year. As Chelsea mentioned earlier, our guiding framework for our priorities follows the 4 pillars you see on the screen there: affordability, creation, choice, and stability. Though solving our housing crisis will require a spectrum of different approaches, on guidance from our really smart partners at Gallo and Robinson, we're focusing on just one priority within each of our pillars. So I'm going to start with affordability. Under this first pillar, we continue to focus on the state rental assistance program. The program's currently running at a deficit, and in order to just meet the needs of the existing volume of approximately 6,500 vouchers, the program needs an additional $8.5 million. Additionally, we know that not everyone who needs a voucher can access one. The unmet need is such that only 1 in 4 people who qualify for a voucher can actually receive one. Our recommendation is to fund the program at an additional $11.5 million to reach another 650 families, making a total funding request for RAP $20 million a year. We're aware of the fiscal constraints in place, excuse me, but we think I really like the framing of the return on investment. We really think that our legislators are beginning to see what a return on investment could be, and we're hoping for some positive progress in the RAP program this year. Our team, specifically Dr. Samaila Adelaide, who's up there, has contributed to significant research in this field, and I would encourage you all to check out our website to learn more about the intricacies and positive outcomes of the RAP program. And there's additional information on the back table as well. Under the second pillar of creation, we're recommending that the state continue the investment of $800 million in bonding from last year that goes to creation and preservation of affordable homes, and dedicate an additional bonding funds to the Housing Trust Fund and Flex Housing Program. These target specifically low and extremely low income residents. Again, Chelsea had some of the data up on the chart below. We understand that many programs are available for folks with moderate incomes, but it's really important that these resources go to where the greatest need is, and that often the private market can't reach when you can't compete in it. Next, under the third pillar of choice, it's important that we advocate for residents to be able to live where they choose, including near critical transportation and accessing commercial districts. We are following the lead of the Desegregate CT Coalition and hoping that Work, Live, Ride is passed to prompt more transit-oriented development. And I believe Kristen spoke about transit-oriented development as well and the importance of that. We feel optimistic about having a broader network this year with a larger group of allies and getting this passed. We're also keeping an eye on how local land use reform can prevent more affordable housing from being built. So we're working closely with the Housing Committee chairs, Representative Felipe and Senator Marks, to protect the viability of zoning legislation like 830G as an important tool to get the building started that we so desperately need. Lastly, our stability pillar is an effort to expand just cause eviction protections. Following the expiration of federal and state eviction moratoria, eviction filings have gone up, including right here in Hartford, where filings have surpassed even pre-pandemic levels. No-fault evictions make up around 11% of evictions in Connecticut. We're following the strong lead of our collaborative partners at the Connecticut Tenants Union in championing this effort. We hope to get it called, voted, and passed this year. It wasn't called last year. And just to be clear, this policy does not take away a landlord's right to evict with justification like non-payment of rent or refusal to agree to even a reasonable rent increase. Connecticut law already protects tenants who are 62 years or older and those with certain disabilities living in complexes with 5 or more units and in federally subsidized or public housing. All tenants need these protections, and we know and work with several tenants who we know they're going to show up and be able to share their stories. Now, I want to invite you and your organizations to also put your efforts behind these priorities. Let your representatives know funding and protecting critical housing programs are important contributions to our local economy during these troubling times when finding, affording, and keeping affordable housing has never been more difficult. We have some new Take Action cards. This is the back of one on the back table, and you'll see them also in I'll call it the networking room behind you. There's a QR code that you can see. You can log in and tell us how you want to participate or are able or interested in participating in our advocacy. We would love to hear from you. Please, somebody fill out this Google form and don't let me get nobody completing this after today. My goal is 10 of you. So for those of you interested in learning more about the issues that I discussed this afternoon, but I think there were really common themes around building, investment, vouchers, we have fact sheets with additional data on each of these topics at the back. But I would also really encourage folks to go to our website, which is www.pschousing.org. There is an incredible amount of research and information there about these issues, but also about the history of these issues and the history of the partnership that's been doing this advocacy for a long time. I was gonna say there are copies of reports from Kristen, but it looks like everybody grabbed those on the way in, so you have to read them. If you grab them before the talk, you have to read them. Finally, please join us for our next event. This is a virtual event. It's a governor's budget briefing. It will be on Monday, February 10th from 3:30 to 4:30. We'll discuss many of the housing bills in the legislative pipeline for the session, as well as the implications the governor's budget may have on our priorities and other housing issues. Thank you again so much to our panelists, to our speakers. This was a really enriching and insightful discussion where I think themes really aligned extremely well, and you all spoke to it so expertly. We appreciate the time you took to come to Hartford and to share your experience. And thank you to all of those of you who've joined us in the Lyceum today. We hope to see you again, and please join us in our advocacy efforts. We hope that you will stick around and enjoy some of the cheese that is getting a lot of talk today. But network, please have a drink of coffee, water. There's no alcohol here. People think that when you say have a drink, but refresh yourself, have some cheese, and appreciate you all coming again. Thank you so much.